Good day, everyone. Greetings from Antwerp in Belgium. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you. In Antwerp, it's windy, raining, fall begins, but we had a very nice summer, and I hope so for you too. My lecture today is on minimum income protection scheme in Europe, and I will try to explain how big the differences are between different European countries, but also, and I will begin with that, also there is something that unites European welfare states. And that is that European welfare states, if we go back to the founding fathers, the idea of the right to a decent minimum income as it was promoted by the founding father of the British social insurance system. We have all the right of a decent minimum income, or as he said, freedom to spend is part of essential freedom. So this idea of minimum income guarantee, adequate minimum income guarantee, is at the heart of European welfare states. However, if we look at poverty trends in EU member states in the past decades, even before this COVID crisis, we see that especially after the financial crisis, 2008, in all member states, poverty among the working age population has been on the rise. So this is signaling a problem with minimum income protection in EU member states. And more so, as a symbol of problems with minimum income protection across Europe, we observe this increase of what has been called the charity economy. You might know that the EU has a fund for European aid to the most deprived. This fund is called FEAD, and before the crisis we don't have the figures today, but certainly this figure will be much higher than the 6% of EU's population using food banks, as it is projected in this slide. So there are signals that there are problems with minimum income guarantee in EU countries. However, as I said, and this is the first idea I want to develop, there is something that is uniting different European welfare states. And that is, if we take the US as a counterexample, what we do observe is that today in all European member states, national safety nets for jobless households are in place. And in general, these safety nets in Europe are much more generous than the safety nets that are in place in the United States. They are not only more generous in the amounts, but also in the people who are reached, in the sense that the United States, there are a lot of national safety nets, however, not for able-bodied young people or people on active age. And this idea of a guarantee of a decent minimum income for all, also for able-bodied active people. This is at the heart of the EU social model, so to speak. However, there is one big difference, and I will not have the time to elaborate on that, in the negative sense, and that is that within the European Union there is no interstate solidarity, which is the case in the United States. In the United States, the minimum income protection schemes are funded, at least partly, by the federal government. So Washington is paying for the poor in the state of Alabama or the state of New York. And this is obviously not the case within the European Union. There is no interstate solidarity. So united, we are united in the sense that all EU member states today have minimum income schemes in place. These systems are more generous, and I will show this with this figure. Here we look at the adequacy of minimum income protection for jobless households. And this, so what is done in this figure, we take the levels of minimum income protection, and we show these levels as a percentage of the European poverty line. This is the Arab 60. This is the European poverty line, and I will come back to that later. At the bottom, you can see the US as the US, and here we have the minimum income protection as a percentage of the European poverty line, of course calculated for the US, for a single person. And here this is the median for all European countries. So as you see, much higher than in the US. I just highlight Spain. This is not a new scheme in Spain, but these amounts were calculated for different places in Spain in the old system. And as you can see, if we compare Spain with the US, the social minimum in Spain, or the social minima in Spain, are relatively higher than it is the case in the US. So, in all countries, minimum income schemes in place, more generous, but without interstate solidarity. And what is important, and here I come back to my FEAT, the European food banks, and I used to call this FEAT the misery fund. So the food help, which is increasing in Europe, but if we compare with the importance of food help in the US, then it is very clear that in Europe, fortunately, this remains very marginal. And as you can see, the trend between 1996 and 2014 in the US, there is a huge increase in the number of people relying on food stamps. And food stamps, food help, actually in the US has become the most important social protection for the active age populations. This is fortunately not the case, or at least not yet the case in Europe. So the importance of minimum income protection by social insurances and by social assistance. Now, when we start thinking about minimum incomes and minimum income protection, we should take a broad perspective. We should think about minimum incomes sensu lato. And in a sense, we should think about minimum income protection, social assistance, as the icing on the cake of the welfare state. And the important elements in the baking of this cake are the minimum wages, and I will come back to that. Minimum wages, social protection, so social insurances, unemployment insurance, sickness insurance, etc., and social assistance. Very importantly, the essential services: housing, adequate housing, affordable housing, healthcare, and childcare. So we should think about minimum income protection in combination with all these elements of what we can call the social fabric in the welfare state. So we should not only look at social assistance, we should look at social assistance in combination with other important elements in the social fabric of the welfare state. Minimum wage, in a sense, this is the basic, this is the bottom on which the whole welfare states can rely. Minimum wage, the net disposable income of minimum wage earners, and the difference between the two, and this is important, and I'll come back to that later. The difference between the minimum wage, so the gross minimum wage, and the take-home income of a minimum wage earner refers to the taxes that the minimum wage earner has to pay, the in-work benefits that the minimum wage earner can get from the welfare state, and child allowances, and also, of course, the use of services such as childcare. This is the net disposable income of the minimum wage earner, and then going to minimum income of jobless households. Here is social insurance in place. Think about the unemployment benefits and the minimum unemployment benefits or minimum sickness benefits, and the social assistance. The focus of my lecture is on social assistance. This is the icing on the cake, the social assistance, which is in most EU countries marginal in the whole architecture of the welfare state. Social assistance is marginal. It's only a fraction of active age households who have to rely on social assistance. So the focus of my talk is on this social assistance. Now, before going into the question how adequate social minimum income protection is, how this evolved over time, how big the differences are between countries, we should take a step back and think about decent minimum income. What is a decent minimum income? How to define decent minimum incomes? I will not go into this in detail, just putting forward two benchmarks in the sense of decent minimum incomes, benchmarks that are used in many EU countries and are used by the European Commission. That is the EU poverty line. I already mentioned the EU poverty line, and this EU poverty line is defined as 60% of median household income. 60% of median household income in every country. So 60% of median household income of the Spanish households. This is the poverty line for Spain. In Belgium, it's 60% of median household income of Belgian households, and obviously because Belgium is a richer country than Spain. The level of the poverty line of the EU poverty line in Belgium is higher than the level of the poverty line in Spain. This is the most used benchmark of decent minimum incomes. This is widely used within Europe. And this is also the benchmark that I will use in this presentation. And the reason why I will use this through this presentation is the fact that we have this poverty line calculated for all member states, and that this poverty line is recalculated year after year. So this is a very useful tool in order to make comparisons across countries and across time. However, there are a number of important drawbacks of this EU poverty line, and one drawback will become clear in a minute when I will show a figure in which I present reference budgets. Reference budgets, these are budgets that are calculated for different countries or for different regions in order to get the amount that households need in order to participate in their society. So these are baskets in which we put food, housing, healthcare costs, etc., etc. And these baskets are priced, and the result of these baskets are these reference budgets. In this figure, and it's maybe this too many information in this figure. Just look at Barcelona. If we take Barcelona, for which we calculated these reference budgets, for a single woman, private tenant, this is the reference budget that this single woman needs, the budget that she needs in order to participate in Barcelona. And this is presented, expressed as a percentage of this European poverty line, this Arab that I already showed. And as you can see in Barcelona, the budget that the single woman needs in order to be able to participate in social life in Barcelona is higher than the European poverty line. Here is a European poverty line, this is a European poverty line, and as you can see, the budget this single woman in Barcelona needs is higher than European poverty line. Or to put it in another way, the European poverty line underestimates the needs of households in Barcelona. This is not the case in Antwerp. In Antwerp, the European poverty line overestimates the needs of people, household living in Antwerp. I just present this because this is an important drawback of the use of the European poverty line, and this is something that you should have in mind when looking at all the graphs that I will present immediately. This underestimation of the budget that households need in poor countries, in Spain, for instance, as compared to the richer countries in Belgium. But again, I will present the figures with the benchmark of the European poverty line. Why? Well, because the European poverty line, we have the figures for all member states for many years, while these reference budgets, it is very time consuming to construct these reference budgets, and as you see, we calculated them for some cities, even not for all countries, and this took a long time. So these reference budgets are important in order to contextualize the benchmark of the European poverty line, but in the comparisons we make, I will use this European poverty line. Okay, let's go into the diversity between countries, in terms of generosity, in terms of the social fabrics, in terms of benefit setting, in terms of conditions, sanctions, means tests, etc. And I start with generosity. The generosity and the composition of minimum income protection in different countries. And I will do that using typical household types. Typical household types, I already showed the single woman in Barcelona. What I will do now is show the case of a single man, non-diverse, age 35, a married couple with 2 children, and a divorced alone mother not receiving alimony with 2 children. And what we do is calculate the benefits, the net benefits that these household types would get in different countries, given taxation, given the rules of social assistance, social insurances, etc., etc. And this is the result. So this for all EU member states, and here highlighted Spain, and Spain. But what I want to show is this big diversity within the EU. If we take the single man, this is the income of a social assistance receiver in Italy, as a percentage of the Italian poverty line, which is much lower than the poverty line. So the minimum protection in Italy is very inadequate. It's somewhat better in Romania, Bulgaria, and it is adequate in the Netherlands and adequate in Denmark. In both countries, the income of a social assistance receiver, a single social assistance receiver, is at the level of the European poverty line. And Spain, as I said, in the old system, and Spain is somewhat in the middle. Same more or less if we look at couple with 2 children and lone parents with 2 children. Again, Italy very inadequate, Spain more adequate than Italy, and just one country where the protection level is adequate, and that is the Netherlands. So what this comparison shows is the huge diversity within the EU, with on the one hand countries where minimum income protection is highly inadequate, and some countries, but only some countries, where income protection is just adequate. Basically only 2 countries, and that is the Netherlands and Denmark. In all other countries, minimum income protection is inadequate. I take my own country, Belgium, inadequate for a single person, inadequate for a couple with 2 children, and inadequate for a lone parent with 2 children. Okay, this is adequacy, and important also to show the importance of looking at packages, not only looking at the social benefit, the minimum income benefit as such, but taking into account possible income taxes. So in the Netherlands, social assistance receivers pay taxes, taking into account child benefits, which is important in the Netherlands, for instance, taking into account housing allowances, very important, the housing allowances, and taking into account heating benefits and other income sources. If we think about social minimum income protection, as I already said, it is important to look at minimum income protection, at social assistance, as a part of the broad social fabric in the welfare state. Part of the broad social fabric, and that is the minimum wage, gross minimum wage, the net disposable income of minimum wage earners, and the minimum incomes of jobless households. And these social fabrics, they are organized in different ways in different countries. Some countries start from a high minimum wage, but do apply high taxes, while other countries have low minimum wages, but low taxes. Some countries make a big effort in order to increase the income, the take-home income of minimum wage earners, for instance, with child benefits, with adding child benefits on minimum wage, while other countries are very much concerned with the work incentives, the carrots, in order to give incentives to minimum wage, to social benefit recipients to look for a job and to move towards the labor market. And this is what I will show now for the different countries in the EU, how these relationships and these choices in different social fabrics are organized within the EU. I start here with a single person. Here we have all the EU member states. This is Romania, this is the Netherlands, and here is Spain. This is the minimum wage, the gross minimum wage in the different countries expressed as a percentage of the European poverty line. And as you can see, the level of the minimum wage in Romania compared to the poverty line, the Romanian poverty line, is very high compared to all other countries, compared to, for instance, Netherlands, or compared to Spain. Okay, that's the starting point. This is the bottom, where we start, the gross minimum wage. And in a sense, this is a glass ceiling. The minimum wage is a ceiling, or the bottom of the whole architecture of minimum income protection in different social fabrics, in different national social fabrics. In some countries, minimum wage earners pay taxes. So, for instance, in Romania, the minimum wage earner pays high taxes. This is the net income of the minimum wage earner compared to the gross income of the minimum wage earner. You see huge difference. So high taxes on minimum wages in Romania. This is part of their social fabric. They start with a high minimum wage, but with high taxes. In the Netherlands, the minimum wage is much lower, but no taxes. And more or less the same in Spain, low minimum wage, but very high, limited taxes on minimum wage. Importantly, if we take here Spain, what we do observe is that the minimum income of a minimum wage earner, here is below the poverty line. So the income of the minimum wage earner, so this is a person working full-time for a minimum wage, the income of this minimum wage earner is below the poverty line. And this signals an important problem, because if the income of minimum wage earner is below the poverty line, obviously the income of recipients of social assistance, of jobless households, will remain below the poverty line. Okay, let's go. We have, this is the minimum wage, the net income of a minimum wage earner. And now we look at the level of social assistance, so the benefits for jobless households. And we take the example of Romania, starting from a high minimum wage, high taxes, so the net minimum income of minimum wage earner is much lower than what would have been the case if no taxes would have been levied on this wage levels. And here is the social assistance, so the benefit for jobless households, and you see a huge difference. The jobless households receives a much lower amount than the income of the minimum wage earner. This is because in Romania a lot the work incentives are stressed a lot. And obviously, as a result, the minimum income protection is far below the poverty line in Romania. If we take the example of the Netherlands, starting from a lower minimum wage, low taxes, and a lower work incentive than which is the case in Romania. And as a result, the minimum income protection for for a single person in the Netherlands is just adequate, is just on the poverty line. If we take Spain, lower minimum wage, low taxes, but the work incentives are higher in Spain than in the Netherlands, somewhat higher than in the Netherlands, for instance. Inadequate. The minimum income protection in Spain is inadequate, but this is related to the fact that the income of the minimum wage earner is also very, very close to the poverty line. And so if the Spanish government wants to create work incentives for jobless people in order to incentivize them to take a job, then obviously the minimum income protection level will be inadequate as compared to the European poverty line. I can show you the same picture for the case of a lone parent family with 2 children. So again, to start with, a high minimum wage, gross minimum wage in Romania, low in the Netherlands, low in Spain. Importantly, for a lone parent family with 2 children, the gross minimum wage is below the poverty line, so it's inadequate in the Netherlands, in most EU countries, and also in Spain. In Romania, okay, in Romania, taxes are paid on the minimum wage, so the lone parent with two families working full-time on minimum wage is paying taxes in Romania, while in the Netherlands the government is giving this family additional income support, support as in-work benefits, support in terms of child benefits. So the Dutch government is helping the minimum wage earner in order to increase the income and to make sure that the income of this full-time working lone parent family with two children is above the poverty line. This is Spain, low minimum wage and additional benefits, but the level of the income level of a lone parent family working on the minimum wage is below the poverty line in Spain, and as a consequence the social assistance level is below the poverty line as a consequence, because obviously the level of social assistance cannot be higher than the level of the income of families working full-time on minimum wage level. And this is how the different fabrics in different European welfare states are working. There are different choices. If we compare Romania and the Netherlands, we have two clear different social fabric and different political choices that are behind that. But as a consequence, in all EU member states, the income protection level for lone parents with children in almost all member states, the income level of the income protection for lone parent families is below the poverty line, as a consequence of the minimum wage, taxes and work incentives. Okay, these are the differences between countries, and this idea that we should look at minimum income protection in terms of policy packages. It's not sufficient to look at the benefit level of that precise scheme, but we must look at the policy packages, and these policy packages as part of the broader social fabrics in welfare states. Importantly, but I will be very short on that, if we think about the adequacy of minimum income protection, very important is benefit setting and indexing. In most countries, social assistance and social benefits are related to prices, so increase of prices are translated in increases of benefit levels. In some countries, but this is a very tiny minority of countries, the benefits are also related to the increases of wages. This is a very important point if we think in terms of intertemporal changes. But I can't go into details given the time limits of this presentation. Big differences in terms of activation and conditionalities. You will have the PowerPoint, so then and the paper, so you can go into details if you want. Just showing the big differences across countries. If we look at how benefit schemes react on people, social assistance recipients who are not willing to take up a job. In some countries this leads to a suspension. In other countries, so for instance Italy, Poland, Portugal, this leads to termination of the benefits. and in some other countries, such as France, Germany, Spain. No, Spain is not here in these graphs, but Germany, Finland, France. This leads to a reduction of the payments. So big differences across countries, and also big differences in terms of the means test, which is obviously very important if we think about the adequacy of social assistance. The means test, which is very different across countries. I just give one example, how different countries take into account immovable property. And as you can see, in Austria, for instance, the family home or the real property needs to be sold in order to get social assistance payment. The family home in Bulgaria is exempt of the means test if there is at least if there is no room per family member. And to take another example, in Denmark, this is fully discretionary. It is the choice of the social assistant to decide whether or not the family home is taken into account in the means test. So now I get to the last question, so the adequacy, and I already showed that minimum income protection in most EU countries remains below the European poverty line, and this is related to the architecture of the welfare state, to the social fabric, related to the level of the minimum wages, related to the tax system, related to the benefit system. And so if we look at the impact of minimum income protection on poverty as a whole, poverty in different countries, then again we should not look at social assistance in isolation. Social assistance is just part of the whole social fabric. We should look at generosity, and this is what I did in the figures that I showed, but we should also take into account the use of the benefits, how many people have actually access to the benefits. There are many barriers in social assistance. Some may not qualify by design, others do not take up the benefits because the benefits, it's too difficult to get them, because they do not have the information, they simply do not know that they could ask for the benefits. The application process can be too complicated, etc., etc. So this is the big problem of non-take-up. I'm sure that this will be part of your discussions during this course. So take-up, important. And also very, very important in order to assess the adequacy of minimum income protection is to consider the other social benefits, and particularly social insurances, and to consider the wages. And I already showed the importance of the wages. The wages, in a sense, it's setting the floor of minimum income protection. And social insurances is very important. Take the example of unemployment insurance. In some countries, unemployment insurance is rather generous, unlimited in time. This is, for instance, the case in Belgium. Unemployment insurance unlimited in time. In other countries, unemployment insurance is limited in time. So many unemployed people must rely on social assistance. But unemployment benefits, social insurance, is generally more generous than social assistance. So it's very important to take into account again, this architecture of different social benefits and relationship between social insurance, which is more generous, the relationship between social insurance, wages, social insurance, and social assistance. So if we then look at the impact of social assistance on poverty, I just give two examples. There's many information in this figure, but just look at the Netherlands and Poland. The blue bars show the poverty level in both countries, the poverty level among jobless households. And as you can see, the bar in the Netherlands is much lower than the bar in Poland, which means that the poverty level in the Netherlands is lower than in Poland. However, the red bars show the coverage of minimum income protection. So the share of people using minimum income protection, social assistance. And as you can see, the coverage in the Netherlands is much lower than in Poland. And this seems to be paradoxical. Poverty is lower in the Netherlands, but the coverage of minimum income protection is much higher in Poland. And the answer to the paradox is very simple. The answer refers to the social fabric, refers to minimum wages, refers to the tax system, refers to benefit systems in social insurances, refers to the availability of childcare, the affordability of childcare, of housing, etc., etc. So it would be you cannot look just at the adequacy of social assistance in order to think about the impact of social protection on poverty in member states. Here we look at across member states, but obviously the same reasoning holds when we start thinking across time. If we think in terms of how to make progress, how to eradicate poverty in Spain, for instance, then it's not sufficient to think only about social assistance and minimum income protection. Then you should think about the whole architecture of the Spanish welfare states, taking into account the minimum wages, the tax system, the work incentives, and the collective services, the affordability, for instance, of childcare. Now, if we look at the impact of the generosity of minimum incomes on employment and on poverty, what is very clear is that within the EU, there is a clear positive correlation between the generosity of social assistance and poverty. So the higher, the more generous social assistance, the lower poverty. And the same is true for the net minimum wage. The higher net minimum wages, the lower poverty. So minimum income protection schemes, they are important as a tool to reduce poverty, but again, it's not only the single policy instruments that are important. You should look at the whole architecture behind these minimum income schemes. Conclusion. There is in the EU a great diversity of minimum income protection schemes, both in terms of generosity and in terms of conditionalities. But what is important is the fact that in all EU member states, minimum income protection schemes for all, covering, in principle, covering all citizens, are in place. And this is, I would say, at the heart of the social architecture of Europe. However, again, it should be stressed, there is no solidarity between European welfare states, between the rich welfare states and the poor welfare states. The rich Europeans are not paying taxes for the poor Europeans in other countries. So, first conclusion. Minimum income, great diversity, but there is something that is uniting different member states. Secondly, adequacy is related to many, many factors. It's related to generosity, to different conditions, accessibility. So it's related to the social fabric as a whole. Third conclusion, benefit levels are inadequate in most countries. Are inadequate even in the richest EU member states. Minimum income protection remains inadequate. And therefore, the focus on minimum income protection is important, but it should be part of a broader strategy. So the only focus on minimum income protection schemes in social assistance is as such insufficient. The focus is important, it should be a priority in European policy making and policymakers in different EU member states, but it should be part of a broader strategy. So need to prioritize minimum incomes, and so going back to the founding fathers, catering for the most vulnerable, this should be the priority of the European Social Union, and here we should think about solidarity mechanisms between the rich and the poor countries. Second, minimum incomes. Why are minimum incomes so important? Well, because minimum incomes are automatic stabilizers, social stabilizers and economic stabilizers, and this is what we witnessed during this pandemic crisis. The minimum income protection has been very important, the schemes have been very important stabilizers across Europe, and so this means that investing in these schemes, making them more adequate, more accessible, is or should be a priority. Thirdly, it should be a priority because in the past we have learned that employment and social investment strategies are important but not sufficient to reduce poverty. Also, the focus on employment-related welfare reforms after the financial crisis in 2008, and the focus on social investment strategies was important, but was not sufficient at all to reduce poverty. On the contrary, poverty increased, although employment levels increased during these decades. And obviously, social assistance and minimum income protection will become even more important in the future as a consequence of the growing number of platform workers, the growing number of self-employed and flexible workers, that is to say, growing number of people who cannot be protected adequately by social insurance systems. And as a consequence, social assistance will become more important in the future, and therefore in Europe and in all European member states, we should put minimum incomes in minimum income protection at the top of our social agendas. Many thanks. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I hope we will have the opportunity to have a lively debate after this presentation. Thank you very much.